Sometimes my sewing room is just chaos. I have things everywhere. I have bits and pieces, but they are all for the same project. Hello, once again, I'm Linda from this channel, Miss Linda Milky Quilts. And I have posted a video 2 weeks ago. I called it Bits and Pieces. And it is a Wonky Courthouse step project because I make most of my quilts from donated fabrics, and I also finish a project before I start another one. So when I get a bunch of fabric out and put it on my desktop, that is what I'm going to be using for this quilt. And I try to put my colors and patterns together so that there is some kind of cohesiveness to the quilt. And I hope that they look nice when I'm finished. I do all of my sewing on my sewing machine here, and I do all of my quilting at home on that machine over there. And the reason I do that, I like to keep my presser foot on the sewing machine. I've had some trouble with a couple of presser foot problems. When I take them off and put them back on, they're not quite put back on in the right way. And that's my fault because I don't tighten up the screw tight enough to be able to make it stay in the right place. So that's a very important thing for me to do, to check twice. So usually I do all my piecing on this machine, and the machine over there, I do all my machine quilting. And I do all my own machine quilting on that machine. I've taken one quilt in my whole life out to a long armor, and it was lovely when it was done. But if the number of quilts that I tend to make had to go to long arming, I wouldn't be able to do nearly as much as I do. So I try to be aware of the type of thing that I'm making and try to be very cautious about how I'm going to put it together so that I can do the machine quilting as well. So I do a lot of Quilt As You Go. And you can see on the wall behind me, I am now working on a Quilt As You Go project. When I have a block size, I cut out from my fabric pieces. Those came mostly from fat quarters, and they are about 17 inches square. And I put a number of them together in a grid so I can see what the back of the quilt is going to look like when it's done. And then when I have them in an order that I think are going to be cohesive and look kind of nice, I then turn them over, put the fronts on with a piece of batting and quilt it, and then I will join it together with the Quilt As You Go. So I'm using these as the backing for the blocks I made in the last video. And if you recall, Bits and Pieces, it's a Wonky Courthouse steps, and made from small pieces of white, off-white, and look at the bag full I have collected. I don't know how many courthouse steps I should make, but this could make like 50 of them. I'm not going to make 50 though. And I also have a plastic container, and I have all of these pieces of brightly colored fabrics that are not very long and not very wide. And that's what I'm making those courthouse steps. And if you want to refer to these, how to make them, just look at the previous video that I posted 2 weeks ago called Bits and Pieces, and you can see how I made them. I'm not a big ruler and, make it as fancy. I tend to make things that are quite improvisational, I say, and it gets the job done, and I like that. So what I'm doing, I'm going to show you here. When I have my bits and pieces blocks ready to go, I line them up on my desktop, 4 across and 4 down. And I join these end to end. And then each one end to end. And then I join the rows together and make a 16 patch. And these blocks are 4.5 inches when they're finished here. And when they're sewn into a 16 patch like that, it turns into a 16.5 inch square. And that's what's on the back side of these blocks on the wall. So I'll show you how I chain piece these together. Then I'll show you how I quilt those, and I'll show you how I join those blocks together to make a full quilt. So that is what I'm going to do in this video. I'm going to show you how to sew these together. And if you have questions, just ask in the comments. I'm very happy to respond to your questions if you have them. And I think it's going to be a really nice quilt when it's done. So I hope you stay with me, and I'll show you how to do this. To start with, I take 2 of the pieces and place them face together on my sewing machine table. Sew from the top to the bottom of one side. Then I pick up the next 2 and chain piece one whole row down one side. You will notice that those blocks are not joined together first, as I suggested you could do. This might make it a little easier for some people to do this chain piecing. I find it a lot easier, and I get better corners and better blocks meeting up at the corners. So I sew 4 pairs together, 1, 2, 3, 4, keeping the edges together, and stitch 4 pairs together first of all. When I get to the bottom of the 4th pair, I will stop and sort of open up the top one and pick off the table, the next top one, and I'm going to continue the same process, sewing 4 together on one side. And you will see that the thread that joins the rows together keeps them even and distributed properly. And I'm only sewing 4.5 inches the length of the square. Makes it very easy. And keeping them all together means I don't have to hold on to everything. I'm really only holding on to the 2 pieces that I am sewing together at that time. It is very easy for me to do things like that, especially when it's only a 16-inch block when it's finished. So at the end of the first row and the second row, then I will add the last 4 to make all 16 blocks put together. Okay, now I have all 16 together, and I pull out the 16 sewn together and fold over the top 4 onto the second row of the pieces. Now all I have to do is stitch across the length of the block or the width of the block, sewing across all 4. Where this thread is holding the rows together in between keeps the seam allowances even there. And I can push one of the seam allowances at the top to one side, and the one underneath I can turn it the other way so that when I press it later, it will lie a bit flatter and not have a bulky seam at the intersections. I find this is the easiest way to sew a number of blocks together, whether it's just a small block like this with a lot of seams, or small blocks without any seams, just plain blocks. It makes the intersections or the joins at the corners very easy to be stepped up on top of each other, and they usually work out very well if you've done your pressing previously and you've done your measuring previously. I know all of my blocks are 4.5 inches, so they should go together well. When I have all 16 sewn together, then I'll take them to the iron and press all of the seams and make sure that the block lies flat. So when I quilt it, it is a lot easier to quilt. But this is the easiest way to put numerous blocks together in a hurry. So here's the last block sewing together, the last row. I start at the beginning and I make sure my needle is down when I stop, and I can hold the end, and then all I have to really do is just make sure my seam allowances are lying to the left or to the right, depending on which direction the previous row went. And when I have the 4 done, see, it doesn't take very long to stitch across 16 inches. It's very convenient to have everything held together. So now I just check, make sure that it's okay. And what I'm going to do now is just go to the iron and press it. Now it's time for me to quilt the squares after I've sewn them all together in a 16 patch. So what I do is I make sure that the top is pressed very well with all of the seam allowances in one side or to the other side. There's a piece of batting and a backing piece of fabric here. And what I do is I take my iron and I give it a good press to hold it in place on the batting. I also make sure that the back doesn't have any wrinkles or doesn't have any problems, and it's nice and smooth at the back. And once I have this pressed with a little bit of extra around the outside, so I've got room for sewing on and off, then I take it over here to my quilting machine. And when I'm at my quilting machine, I am going to quilt this using my walking foot, and I have my stitch length just a couple of stitches longer than regular stitching. And on my sewing machine here, I have an application that I can slow the stitching down right here. I can slow the stitching down, and I have it about medium speed. Not fast, not slow, but medium speed. Also, I could, if I really wanted to, I have an application here where I can do a knee lift for the presser foot. A bar comes out of here, and then I can just move my leg sideways and it will raise and lower the presser foot for me. But these are so small, it's easy for me to just use my hand and I will lift the lever at the back. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to put a stitch around the whole outside to hold everything together. And when I'm finished, this block will measure 16 1/2 inches. I just make sure that it's nice and smooth. Using the needle down when I stop, that allows me to pivot at the corners, and I've got lots of corners to pivot. When I'm machine quilting, I like to be just a little bit higher than the presser foot so I could hold my hands down and I could keep my back straight. As you see, I'm on a stool. I don't have a back to lean up against, but I do put a cushion underneath to raise me up a little bit. But I want to have my shoulders in a position where my arms are easily moving back and forth and I don't have to reach or stretch too hard. This is one of the reasons why I really love Quilt As You Go. Look at the size of this. It's 16 1/2 inches. It's not a huge big quilt that I have to lift up and push or move or maneuver through the presser foot. This is a piece of cake. There, so once I've gone once around the outside, now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch, echo stitch or stitch in the ditch, I don't know what it's called. But I'm just going to come down, pivot, down, and that's why raising and lowering the presser foot is an easy thing. Now this is not, it is not the fastest way to quilt a block this size, but I like the effect, and what I can do is just fold this piece up and fold that flap over, and it's very easy to just reach my hand through and pivot around each of these. It's not as fast as just corner to corner or straight line stitching, I know that. And I have timed myself. It takes me anywhere from 20 to 25 minutes to quilt this in this manner. So once you think about that, how much time are you willing to take to quilt these versus paying a long armor if you have a full-size quilt to quilt, or the stress and wear on your back and shoulders, or the cost of a wide backing. So you have to enjoy the process of doing something like this. It's slow, sometimes it's tedious, sometimes, you know, you might just not want to do something like this. But I don't hand stitch anymore. I don't hand quilt anymore. And this is one way that I can make a scrap quilt that I would like to donate. And I don't mind spending the time. Usually I have some music playing in the background, but right now, because I'm doing a video, I can't do that for copyright reasons. But in the meantime, that's one of the things that I have to be careful of, not too fast, because if I lift the presser foot up while I'm still stitching, or the needle isn't down, my machine wants to stop and beep at me. So it's a slow process, but it's kind of fun. And it gives a nice effect on the back. But you have to be aware that it is time consuming. And I am making 20 blocks. So with 20 blocks at 20 minutes each to machine stitch in this way. You can't see it at the back because I'm using a pink thread and it doesn't show up at all. But it shows up on a couple of the blocks that are darker. Whoops, too far. But you know, that's okay. And when I have to turn it this way, I just fold that flap up. So I was saying 20-25 minutes to do all of this stitching on here times 20 blocks equals about 6 to 7 hours just to machine quilt all the blocks for this quilt. Now, I've sort of thought about it, and if I have a queen size quilt and I'm quilting end to end or corner to corner with my walking foot, just a straight row, I reckon it takes me about 8 hours to do that because I want to make the rows straight, and the wear and tear on my back also takes toll on me, and I have to have a rest after 3 or 4 rows diagonally down a big quilt. So, I mean, this is easy on my back. It's easy on my hands. It looks nice. I like it. I mean, I don't think you can really see that stitching along the edge. And I can't see it on the back here. Here's a good piece here. You can see maybe the stitching here. It looks nice. But once I do 8 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows, it takes me about 20-25 minutes. But it's easy to do. So I'll just continue. Now I have 2 completed rows, and I will show you how to join them using Quilt As You Go method. I like the fact that the blocks have a continuity all the way down the length of the quilt. So I'm going to try to keep that by making a special little strip to join. Since my blocks are 4.5 inches, I'm going to make a special sashing strip to go between the blocks on the wall. What I'm going to use are blocks from my 4-inch square bin. Every time I look in my bin, I think, what am I going to do with all of these squares? Well, here's a use for them right now. I'm going to select 4-inch squares, cut some little strips of 4-inch white fabric, and then sew them into a strip that is going to go the length of my blocks. But that is too wide for a sashing. So 4 inches, I'm going to just split it lengthwise in half and make a 2-inch strip with white fabric at each end and between each of the blocks. And I'm going to make enough of these to make sashing for the front for the whole quilt. Here's how I measure my sashings. The sashing for the back side is 1 1/2 inches, and the sashing for the front is 2 inches, and then I fold the 2-inch strip in half to be 1 inch. That makes a nice joining sashing for the front and for the back. Here, I'm going to fold the sashing strip and sew it along the edge of the block. And for the back side, I have chosen a blue-gray fabric because there is sort of a blue-gray in the patterns on some of these blocks. When I finish sewing it in, here is the strip that I just sewed in, and it continues the color blocking of all of these courthouse steps. And I know there's 2 rows of stitching on the surface, but that is what holds it together. And on the back side, it's just a nice strip of that blue-gray fabric. So I'll show you how I do the joining. Okay, so the back is this way, and when I have my sashing strip for the back side, it has to be face up so that it is going to sew onto the bottom of here. I keep a little bit at the end so I have something to hang on to. And I might just anchor that with a few stitches. And then I can not have to hold on to that because it is a bit of things. And normally I fold this up so it's not in my way. It doesn't drag over here. All right, so here's my little strip. Now, one thing that I found out from doing the first one was if I open this seam allowance and press them open, it's not quite as bulky, and the sewing machine will have a happier day sewing over them. But I just fold that in half lengthwise, and because those seams are open, they fold together quite nicely. Now I made it a little longer at the ends so I can hold on to it. And I want to have the color just start beyond the color here. So I'm going to take this up again and put this in here so the color is just beyond the color. I think it might be easier if I just sewed this together first. I think I'll do that. And that way I don't have to manipulate this and that at the same time. So I'm just going to fold that in half. And I'm just right close to the edge. There. I just fold it in half. Just to keep the edges together. And I want to make sure that stitching is going to be inside the seam allowance afterwards, so I don't want it up in the middle. There. That will make it easier. I'm all about pressing the easy button. Could have been just basted. It wouldn't matter if it was sewed. It's just holding it together so both edges are even. All right. Now, turn that one down one. Now, I just make sure that the colors are going to match what's beside it. I could turn it this way, and if something was light there and light there, I might move it the other way around, but this looks fine for me. All right, so I'm going to start this one there. And I use the width of my presser foot as a seam guide. And I make sure that this piece of sashing at the back is at the edge. And I know that my fabric comes to the edge because I trimmed it off there. So everything should match. And I hold them there, hold them there. I could sew this twice, once for the backing and once for the front, but I'm confident that I can sew the layers together. And I just don't want the color. That's a little bit long. So next time I might shorten up one of these to make it not come right to the edge there. I could do that easily by just shortening or making a different seam allowance, but this will work. All right, now just trim this off. That'll be for the next one. I like to just check to make sure that nothing is hanging out where it shouldn't hang out on this side. And that's fine. And I don't mind the fact that they're not all just lined up perfectly, because none of these line up perfectly either. So I'm just going to do a little press. I like to do a press here. Press that up. So I'm just going to stand up and go over to the iron. So here's the next block that's going to go on the end of here. And likewise, I could turn it around this way. It's not going to make a difference because it's all good. There's no pattern on the back that has to be a certain way. Looks good. So this goes upside down on my table. This comes here on top. Now, this blue-gray sashing on the back goes to the edge of this block that I'm adding. Backing, backing. Front, front. And I start at one edge, making sure my blocks are straight and even all the way down. I don't want this one hanging up like that. I want it even so that the other end is going to be correct. Nice and even. So that comes up there. I just fold back that piece of sashing, and inside here, once again, I'm just going to use the width of my presser foot as my seam guide here. And all I'm doing this time is sewing the sashing to the backing of the next piece. When that's done, I lift up the presser foot and pull this piece that I just joined on over, and I fold it up so it fits in underneath the arm. Now, when I look at this, I can pull that apart. I don't want to pull it apart. I want those two edges of the seam allowances to butt up together. And this flap that I sewed on the other side, I just turn it over and lay it down flat here, and I'm just going to sew this across here. Now, some people would want to sew that by hand, and so no stitching shows on the front. Unfortunately, my hand stitching days are over, and I just put a row of stitching on this side, and I put a row of stitching on that side just to equalize the stitching. If you want to sew it by hand all the way down, you would have no seaming on the front, and you could just do that little bit there to make sure that that little bit of quilting is continuous across there. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do what I do and sew it down. Now there's a stitch line here. I just want to make sure that I cover up that stitch line, and I don't have an extra line of stitching showing on the front or the back. And it's nice to be able to start on and off. Having these seam allowances pressed open allows my presser foot to go over there pretty easily. The first one I didn't press them open. I pressed them to one side, and they're a little bulky, and I don't like that particularly. But the first one lives. The rest are going to be better. If you press this first, it's a lot easier than having it unpressed and trying to hold it down and make sure there's no folds and tucks. A little bit of pressing goes a long way. So when I join the long rows to the next long rows, they're all going to be white. So I can just use one great huge strip of white sashing there to join the rows together. No more of this piecing here. I just wanted to keep that color flowing from the top to the bottom. I like the way that looks when it's on the wall. So I'll just continue doing these things. Joining the two long pieces together is exactly the same, and I only have this much in my sewing machine arm space, but I have to clear away all the things on my table when I join the rows together, because there's not enough room there without having things falling off on the floor. So when I join the rows together, I clear up everything, and I have my binding already made as well, because I use pieces for binding. So I've got a bit of organizing to do before I can join the rows together. But you see how I'm doing this now. It's really easy, and I really don't have to hold on to it very much. It just, the feed dog pulls it through. See, my box is there, it's in the way. Feed dog pulls it through. All I have to do is just guide it so it's on the straight and narrow piece of binding. Keep it on the straight and narrow. I hope you enjoyed this video. I won't finish the quilt before I post this video, but I will post a picture of it next time. But I'm going to go away for a couple of days, and I want to have some of this done before I go. And I'm doing a big trunk show tomorrow night, so I've got to get ready for that. Exciting times coming. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've listened this long and you're still with me, if you haven't subscribed, would you please consider subscribing? My numbers are going up, and it's really encouraging me to have some more videos. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.